Okay, today is day 2 of Unit 2, which is on the types of economic systems. And today's learning objectives are, as you see here on the screen. We're going to look at what the 3 basic economic questions are that are answered by all economic systems. We are going to look at what productive resources are, which are also known as factors of production. We're going to look at how an economic system is defined, and then we're going to look at 3 major general categories of economic systems: traditional economies, market economies, and command economies. All right, let's start with the basic economic questions. Now, all economic systems have to answer 3 basic economic questions. Who answers these 3 basic economic questions determines what type of economic system it is. The 3 basic economic questions that must be answered by all economic systems, first off, are what to produce. With what to produce, the economy is trying to figure out what goods and services will be produced in that economy, what things will be provided, what services will be provided within that economy. Also, they have to decide how to produce those goods and services. They need to look at what are referred to as their productive resources, which we're going to examine here in just a minute. How do you use these productive resources to be able to produce those goods and services within the economy? And then lastly, they have to look at for whom to produce. In other words, they need to see who in that society will actually get the results of production, who will actually be able to buy or receive the goods or services or both that are being produced in that economy. And all economic systems have to answer these 3 basic questions: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. It's just a matter of who goes about making those decisions in an economy that decides or defines, what kind of economy that is. Let's look at real quickly at how to produce and understand what these productive resources are. And we've already kind of looked at these as general categories when we did the bookmaking activity during day 1. Okay. Productive resources are also referred to in a lot of cases as the factors of production. They are things that are used to produce. Another term that can be used for this is an input. Okay. Input is something that goes into the production of goods and services that will satisfy those economic wants of society. So it's all the things that are put into the process of providing those goods or services. We'll get a little more clarification on this as we go through this. The first major category of productive resources are natural resources. Now, these are things provided by nature. Sometimes you hear them referred to as land. It's just a generic term that's been used within the field of economics for decades to refer to the natural resources. They're basically the gifts of nature, the things that you can receive that come from nature. They come in varying forms. Some of the natural resources you have are perpetual. In other words, you really don't need to worry about using them up. They're widely available. Sunlight is a good example of this. The sun will continue to burn for as long as we're going to be around. So that is a resource that can be used. Land is so widely available that it is in no danger of being used up in the foreseeable future. Wind is perpetual. Wind is always being generated by the atmosphere. So that is a resource that could be used. Other resources are renewable. Now, these are things that could be used up, but you have ways of replacing them as they're used. In other words, growing a crop, growing a new set of trees in a forest, purifying water that has been contaminated, breeding livestock, breeding fish. All of those are renewable resources. Every single thing that I just named could actually be used up and no longer be available if no action was taken to renew them. But you can plant new crops, you can plant new trees, you can breed new livestock, you can breed more fish, you can continue to purify water. Water always gets returned to nature. It's just a matter of whether it's usable or not. But we have ways of purifying water that will continue to make it available for us, fresh and usable by us. The third major category of natural resources are non-renewable. Now, these are ones that, to be quite honest, once they're used, they're gone forever. Oil, coal, natural gas are the most common examples. Even things that you can mine, like metal and things along those lines, unless you're doing something to recycle them, they can be used up and never be used again if they're not put back in some manner. Now, natural resources, to be quite honest, don't really have value in and of themselves. They only have value, economic value, insofar as that somebody can figure out how to use them and put them into the production process. Oil didn't really have value in and of itself until they figured out you could use it to lubricate. You could use it to burn and create energy from it that you could use as fuel. You could turn it into plastic. There's a lot of things it can be used for. It really didn't have any value. It only has value insofar as that you can use it for things along the lines of what I just listed. Human resources is the next main category of resources, and these are the people. This is also referred to as labor. So you might hear comps referred to as the labor market. It just refers to the human resources, the people, the time and effort that people put into producing goods and services in exchange for pay. This is done in a couple ways. It can be done as physical labor, in other words, somebody physically performing a task, and that could be stocking a shelf. It could be driving a truck. It could be driving a nail and building a house. And there's a wide variety of things that are all physical labor, fixing a car, things along those lines. But it can also be mental activity. Somebody that is a manager organizing the shift at work. It could be a computer programmer writing a computer program. It could be just a wide variety of possibilities. A business owner that is organizing his business or her business are all mental activity. Now, quantity of the labor that you have available in an economy really depends, one, on the size of the population that economy has available, as well as the people's willingness to work. I mean, you have to have a sizable labor force, and the people in that labor force actually need to be willing to work and put in the work to be able to produce goods and services. The quality, though, depends on how skilled those workers are. Now, the skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities that a worker brings to the workforce are referred to as human capital. And you're going to hear that referred to a lot throughout your adult life of human capital. That's just what do you bring to the table in knowledge, skills, and abilities and experience that will be of benefit to a potential employer. So there's a quantity of labor and a quality of labor that are part of the human resources. Third type of resource is called capital resource. Now, capital resources, always referred to as capital. It could be something physical. It could be a factory. It could be a piece of equipment. Those are all referred to as capital goods. The inventories, the raw wheat that you use to make bread with, that all is considered physical capital. Those are capital goods. There's also the financial capital. This is the money that you need to have in a business that is used to produce that future wealth, because it takes financial capital to purchase physical capital. It takes financial capital to purchase the natural resource. It takes financial capital to pay the human resources for their work. And that's where the money goes. You're using it to buy the equipment. So if you picture a business owner, okay, that business owner is going to need a building probably to operate that business out of. They're going to need, say it's a retail store. They're going to need inventory of the stuff that they sell. They're going to need cash registers. They're going to need displays, whether it be shelving or clothes racks or whatever it might be that they're selling. They're going to need employees, obviously, to carry out the work. They're going to also need money to pay the rent, to pay the electric bill, to cover their insurance, to pay for any advertising that they want to do. The money is needed for a lot of things. Before you even start a business, the only place that money is going to come from is either money you provide yourself, or you get other people to provide that'll be part owners of the business, and that's referred to as investment. Or you might borrow money, and of course you're going to have to pay interest on that money. That's the two places that money can come from, either through money people put into the business, or money that is lent to the business, and usually some combination of both. Once the business is up and operating, you still need financial capital available. This is generally referred to as working capital. And this will come from sales. Hopefully, you have enough sales to generate the working capital that you need to keep the business operating, but you may occasionally need to take on a loan, perhaps for an expansion, or take on additional investments in the business to provide the additional financial capital that you need. This slide's a good summary of the different types of resources. You have those gifts of nature, which could be things like sunlight that are perpetual. And because you can actually take it through some solar panels and run the sunlight through there and produce electricity, that sunlight now will be able to generate something of economic value. You have your renewable resources. In this case, this is a field of corn. You can sell the corn. You can make things out of the corn. You can actually just replant some of the corn seeds to grow more corn, so it's renewable. If you didn't do any of the planting, you'd run out of corn. As long as you keep planting more so you can continue to grow more, that's what makes it renewable. And then there's the non-renewable. In this case, this is a coal mine where they're mining coal to burn for energy. Once that coal is burned, you can't make more coal. You mine more coal, but once you use up the coal, that coal is going to be gone. You have your human resources, your labor. Remember, that's anything that involves physical labor. In this case, it's a construction worker putting a roof on a home, or it could be mental activity. This looks like it might be maybe a cybersecurity person that is monitoring a business's enterprise network to make sure there's nobody trying to intrude on it or attack it. You have your capital resources, your capital, the money that would be used to help pay for all the stuff that you might be utilizing, as well as the physical capital that you might use the financial capital for. In this case, it's a factory. So the factory itself, the equipment itself, the forklifts that might be running around, the tools used to repair this equipment, all the inventories of the stuff that is run through the equipment to produce the final product is all physical capital. What's important on the use of these productive resources is what's called productivity. And if you remember when we did the bookmaking activity, that was one of the things we were focused on in each round, was how much were you cranking out for a given amount of input. Now, we could have measured that a lot of ways. The way that we measured it in the class during the activity was the number of books that were produced for every dollar that I, as the quote factory owner, was spending on producing those books. It could have been how many books were we producing every 3 minutes. That could be a measure of productivity. How many books were being produced per employee could be another measure of productivity. It's simply some form of output divided by some form of input. So it's items per hour, sales per employee, sales per square foot is another good example of productivity used in retail. Businesses want to be able to arrange those productive resources that we just discussed to maximize their productivity. They're making decisions on how much land, in other words, the natural resources, how much labor, those human resources, and how much physical capital, as well as the financial capital that's needed to pay for all this, should be used to produce the product. And businesses, of course, want to maximize that productivity because that minimizes essentially that cost per unit that they're trying to sell, which means they can have more control over their prices and be able to better manage their profits. Now let's start taking a look at economic systems and what defines them. Remember, we talked about the three basic economic questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Economic systems are basically defined by who answers what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce, as well as how they go about making those decisions within that economic system to answer those three basic economic questions. Also, economic systems generally have different economic goals that they emphasize. So we'll be taking a look at each of those within the context of the three major economic systems we're going to be looking at right now. The first one I want to discuss is called a traditional economy. Now, within a traditional economy, what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce are all decided by social custom. In other words, whatever the customs are in that society determine those three things. So whatever is being produced in that society, the goods and services being produced, societal customs decide that. How to produce also gets driven by those same societal customs. How do they go about producing those items? How do they go about making those? as well as who gets the benefits of the production within that society, are also driven by societal custom. Now, in a traditional economy, the primary economic goals are economic stability. In other words, that's people don't have to worry about, do they have a job? Do they have an income coming in? Will they be able to afford products? Will products even be available for them to purchase or have available to them? As well as economic security. They don't have to worry about the what the prices are going to be. Are they going to go up or down? They don't have to worry about it. Are they going to be able to count on having a paycheck or anything along those lines? Good example of this are the Amish. Hopefully, a lot of you might be familiar with the Amish. It's a lot locally, say up in Pennsylvania. All three of those questions that we just discussed are really determined just by what they do in their society. I mean, what do they produce? They produce, crops. They produce some basic clothing. They produce a lot of handmade wood items that you might see for sale at some locations now, as well as some food items. Why is that what they produce? Why aren't they making cell phones? Why aren't they making automobiles there? It's really just societal custom. There's no force that's determining whether or not they should be doing that within their economic system, other than whether or not that's just what their society's custom is. The how to produce, which you see depicted here in these pictures, is also determined by societal custom. They still do things by hand. They build houses by hand. They don't use any power tools. They will just use horse-drawn plows to do their farming with. Is there any reason that they couldn't go out and buy tractors? Is there any reason that they can't have electricity and power tools and heavy equipment and the big machinery to do all this? No, there's really no reason they can't, other than they choose not to, because that's not part of their societal custom. Even whoever gets the production of this labor, or of this production, is all determined by societal custom too. The elderly are taken care of by the youth. The youth know that as they get older, the youth will take care of them. The people that are skilled at building do the building for the people that may be more skilled at the farming or skilled at doing some of the other types of things within their society. And they take care of each other. They just meet each other's needs. Now, there's not a very high standard of living in terms of things that are available in their life for personal comfort and along those lines. They don't have televisions or microwaves or automobiles for the most part. Yes, you see some of that starting to creep into their society too, but it's really not generally part of their societal custom. The only reason it isn't because there's no economic reason. It's just they choose not to have that. Market economies is the next major category we're going to look at. And in a market economy, the three basic economic questions: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, are determined by individuals in the marketplace. The people in the marketplace, whether it's the buyer or the seller, or a combination of both, are making these decisions. Let's take a look at how this works. First off, what to produce is determined by the interaction between consumers and producers. That's the buyers and the sellers in the marketplace. The producers, the sellers, will develop and sell products based on what they think consumers are actually going to want. Consumers then really have the biggest say because they're determining or helping determine what gets produced based on what they're actually going to buy. Because producers are only going to produce and continue to produce whatever consumers continue to demand. And if they don't want it anymore, producers aren't going to waste their resources on producing it. This concept is called consumer sovereignty. The consumer is king. Where we spend our consumer dollars will drive what our economy is producing. Simple as that. If we're no longer buying flip phones, producers are going to stop producing flip phones. That's why they don't produce flip phones anymore. People don't want them. People want the smartphone that provides a lot more features and a lot more convenience than the old flip phones ever did. So it's really, really hard to find some of these older things. And there's probably a lot of things you can think of that have come and go in the marketplace because people initially want them, so producers produce them. And because consumers stop wanting them for whatever reason, producers stop producing them. That concept there is consumer sovereignty. Producers, yes, decide what to produce, but it's purely in reaction to consumer demand. The how to produce is determined by producers. They're trying to maximize their productivity, that output per unit of input, and the profit that goes along with it. So they're trying to figure out what mix of natural resources, human resources, and capital resources do they need to have for the goods or services they're providing, excuse me, that will minimize the necessary cost per unit of output. In other words, how can they keep the cost of whatever it is they're providing to a minimum? Is it very labor intensive? In other words, a lot of workers doing it, and not a lot of machinery or technology used to produce it? Is it a lot of technology and very little human resources? Is it some mix of both, as well as what natural resources also need to be involved in that whole process? And the choices are really driven by what potential consumers they want to appeal to. Think about watches are a good example. Compare a Rolex to a Timex. A Rolex is a very expensive watch. It is very labor intensive. It's handcrafted, it's custom made by skilled craftsmen that spend a lot of time and effort, and they're highly skilled, and they're paid for that skill. And that's what keeps the price high. But Rolex wants to appeal to that high end customer that wants that hand craftsmanship, that wants that high quality. But you compare that to, say, a Timex consumer. Timex, those are made mass production on assembly lines in factories. A lot of technology and a lot of machinery is used in making that, and very little human input is required. There's not a bunch of people actually working on putting in every single little chip and circuit and everything that goes into a Timex watch. A lot of that is done by machines, and there's a little bit of human input that's involved. But they're the kind of customer they're wanting to appeal to is somebody that is just looking for a reliable but inexpensive watch. And they have figured out what mix of machinery and people, as well as the natural resources that they use to make it, they want to use to appeal to them. That would be also why a Rolex is made with gold and platinum and things along those lines, while a Timex is primarily plastic. Lastly, the third question, for whom to produce, is determined by the price of the product. In other words, the price system determines who gets the benefits of the production. In a true market economy, if you can afford to buy it, you have the money for it, you can buy it. There won't be any interference with it. So if there's a buyer and a seller, and the seller has what the buyer wants, and the buyers want to pay what the seller is asking, in a market economy, as long as those two criteria are met, they can make that transaction happen. And of course, they will both enter into it voluntarily and feel like they're better off at the far end of that trade. Now, in a market economy, the two main economic goals are: one, economic freedom. They want to maximize the opportunity for buyers and sellers to come together and exchange in those mutually beneficial transactions where both feel like they're coming out, remember, they're voluntarily, and they're both coming out at the far end of the trade better off in their minds than they were before they entered into the trade. And of course, they want the economic efficiency. That will go into the whole productivity and profit thing. You don't want to have resources that are being wasted and effectively being thrown away after you have to spend money on acquiring those resources. You don't want to have to buy, if you're a restaurant, a bunch of food that doesn't sell because people aren't ordering the items that those things are used in, and you're having to throw away a bunch of produce or meats or whatever it might be because they have exceeded their shelf life, or they're rotting, or they're no longer good, or whatever. Okay, that's where economic efficiency comes in as part of that. And that way, that resource isn't wasted. Of course, you also don't want to waste the human labor. You don't want to have the unemployment where people aren't able to produce or not being used within that economy. The third major type of economy we want to discuss are command economies. In a command economy, those three basic economic questions: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, are really determined by the people in charge. So whoever happens to be controlling that economic system determines what gets produced, determines how it gets produced, determine who gets the production. So originally, command economies, way back centuries ago, were controlled by the powerful rulers. Those are your kings, your pharaohs, your emperors. They determined what was going to get made. They determined how it was going to get made. They determined who would actually get the results of the production. They made those calls all themselves. Now, in a command economy, primary economic goal is really one where to accumulate wealth and goods for the ruling class. That's why you saw a bunch of, rich emperors trying to get richer and richer, pharaohs trying to get richer and richer, kings trying to get richer and richer. And for the working class, really they just want to provide economic stability. Just provide them enough stability and comfort in their lives that they wouldn't basically rise up against them. In your more modern command economies, central planning by whoever's in charge by that state will answer those three basic economic questions. So all of that, what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, all determined by government committees made up of economists, production experts, political officials. They are deciding all of those questions. They determine what gets produced, what goods and services are going to be provided. So they will determine quantities. We're going to make X number of this specific shoe, and these are the sizes we're going to make in these quantities. This is the amount of corn we're going to grow. These are the number of loaves of bread we're going to have made. These are the number of shirts that are going to get produced, and these are the colors that they're going to be produced in, and these are the sizes, and on and on and on. All those decisions, rather than being driven by consumers purchasing and producers trying to produce stuff that consumers would want, it's all dictated by those central planners. They also determine how it gets produced. They determine your job. They determine what you're going to do for your career. They determine what farms are going to be used to produce what crops and in what quantities. They determine what factories will be producing what items and in what quantities. They determine what workers will be doing what job within that economy. They control all of that. They also control prices and wages. So they can control the distribution of the goods and services by setting the prices, not necessarily worrying about what the costs are. They're just saying this is what we think is a fair amount to charge people. They're also at the same time controlling the wages. So they can say, well, we're going to pay people this much so we can make sure they can afford the things that we're setting at the prices that we're setting. And they also determine, how they're going to get distributed. How many is whatever you can buy, what days you're allowed to buy it on, how many loaves of bread you're allowed to purchase, whether you're allowed to buy shoes or not necessarily when you need them, but when they're available, and they determine how many they think that you as a family would need. So they control everything in that command economy. Central planners plan everything, and they control everything. And in these command economies, the primary economic goals are one, the economic equity. They feel this is a way to make things more, quote, fair, unquote, and just by controlling who's making how much. They view everything as being one, if you want to call it a pie, that's being divvied up. If somebody gets a bigger slice, it means it's a smaller slice. So they can control how big of a slice everybody gets. Then they can make sure in their minds they're keeping things more equitable. Also, a goal is economic security for those workers. They can say, well, we will make sure that you have your job. We'll make sure that prices will be predictable. We'll make sure that we're providing what we think are the goods and services that you need in the quantities that we feel are needed within our society. And that concludes today's lesson. We'll continue on next time with the